Hey guys, tonight we slip into something ancient. Not silk pajamas or a fluffy robe. No, we're sliding into a linen burial wrap, dusted with centuries of desert air. You're lying in a low stone chamber beneath the shifting sands, the air dry as old parchment, with a faint scent of natron still lingering in the corners. Above, a carved ceiling stares down like an indifferent god, and all around you, silence reigns except for one uncomfortable sensation, a dull, persistent throb in your upper molars. Because you, dear listener, are a mummy, and your teeth, they've seen better dynasties. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not the only one feeling that phantom ache. Ancient Egyptians had a long and painful relationship with their teeth, one that left behind more than just mummies with cracked enamel. They feared dental pain deeply, almost religiously. In fact, toothache was one of the few things capable of shaking even the most stoic of pharaohs, priests, and potters. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was feared. And that fear didn't fade with embalming fluid. Let's drift backward through time, before linen wrappings and afterlife maps, to when you're still breathing, barely, and chewing, also barely. It's night in an old Theban neighborhood. You're a middle-class craftsperson, asleep on a low mat in a mud brick house, and your mouth is throbbing. Again, it started days ago with a little sensitivity when drinking barley beer, but now at a full drumbeat behind your cheekbone. You press your jaw and try to sleep on the other side. But no luck. You whisper a curse to Sekhmet, goddess of pain and plague, and hope she's in a forgiving mood tonight. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians truly had dentists in any recognizable form. The word dentistry appears in titles like Iryz or one who deals with the teeth, but it's unclear whether that meant treatment or just observation. One early practitioner was Hizare, whose tomb, dating to around 2600 BC, lists him as chief of dentists. But whether Hizare actually pulled teeth or simply cataloged their failures remains a dusty mystery. What we do know is that dental pain left traces far beyond tomb inscriptions. You'll find it mentioned in healing spells, in household remedy scrolls, even in letters complaining about someone's inability to speak properly due to jaw affliction. And those aren't metaphorical. The evidence is literal. Skull after skull, excavated from graveyards stretching across dynasties, reveals crumbling molars, abscesses so deep they reach the sinus cavity, and jawbones that tell stories no hieroglyph ever dared. And yet, no one talked about the Egyptian dentist. You don't see a lot of statuettes of noblemen holding floss. Why? Because dental work wasn't really work at all. It was more like punishment. If your tooth hurt, there were two options: suffer quietly, or trust a man with copper tools and no formal training. Which is basically like asking your neighbor to do brain surgery with a spoon. Except your neighbor also worships a falcon god and thinks demons live in your tongue. So let's pause right there. Let's feel that historical ache together. You're lying still, the night warm, clay walls sweating quietly. A mosquito whines past your ear. Somewhere in the next room, someone coughs. You stare up at a reed ceiling and feel your molar pulse like it has its own heartbeat. And now the worst part. Someone suggests you go to the local healer. You imagine him. Fingernails crusted from grinding ochre, hands calloused from years of mixing incense, and a face that radiates the serene calm of someone who has absolutely no idea what he's doing with teeth. Still, he'll light a small lamp. He'll wave incense. He might chant something that sounds reassuring. Then he'll grab a bronze hook, tap your tooth once, maybe twice, and if you're lucky, he'll decide against pulling it, but probably not. Egyptians believed pain was often the result of spirits, malignant forces that lodge themselves in the body like squatters. Tooth pain was no exception. If your molar screamed, it might not be rot or infection. It could be a small, invisible creature living inside your gums, nibbling away until exorcised. Some amulets were even shaped like open jaws with hieroglyphs meant to drive out mouth demons. Fringe tidbit. One peculiar spell from the Eber's papyrus calls upon the god Horus to strike down the worm in the tooth. Was this metaphor? Maybe, but some scholars argue the Egyptians might have seen larvae in decayed teeth and assumed it was a literal worm infestation. Tooth worms. As if dental pain weren't already bad enough. You shift again on your mat. The floor feels too hard. Your jaw, too soft. You remember someone mentioning a priest at the local temple who specializes in face healing. You doubt he's ever healed a face. But what choice do you have? So you get up quietly before dawn, wrap a linen shawl over your shoulder, and begin walking through the sleepy streets of Thebes. The stars are still out. The Nile mumbles nearby. And all you can think about is whether today is the day you'll let someone poke your gum line with bronze. The fear was real, and you're not alone in it. Some upper-class Egyptians reportedly had their servants treated first, like dental guinea pigs. If the servant didn't scream or faint, then the lady of the house might agree to try the same salve. Otherwise, more incense, more amulets, more silence. But this silence, it's familiar, isn't it? You feel it now, as your own pain softens into a dull memory. The room's cooled, the stars are fading. And for a moment, even though the tools were crude and the spells were suspect, you admire the courage of anyone who dared to open their mouth in ancient Egypt, especially at night, especially with a tooth that twitched like a curse waiting to happen. You shuffle toward the temple district, sandals tapping over hardened earth, the weight of pain pressing into every step. Your linen wrap flutters with each movement, catching the early breeze that sweeps down from the Nile. It smells faintly of lotus, maybe incense, maybe the distant fish markets that have just begun to stir. But all you can focus on is the ever-growing pressure in your jaw, like your face is slowly folding in on itself. The temple complex looms ahead, grand and still half asleep. Carvings of gods stare down at you, eyes narrowed, lips pursed. You get the distinct feeling they're judging you, not for being in pain, but for being weak enough to admit it. You walk past a statue of Anubis, who watches like he already knows how this ends. And yet, the Egyptians were pioneers in medicine. Don't let the superstition fool you. They practiced surgery, they cataloged diseases, and they knew the human body better than most early civilizations. Their medical texts, like the Eber's papyrus and the Edwin Smith papyrus, recorded hundreds of remedies and procedures. The latter even described setting a broken jaw with linen bandages soaked in honey and beer. So why, you ask, did they flinch when it came to teeth? Historians still argue whether dental neglect was the result of religious taboo, social squeamishness, or sheer technological limitation. But one factor everyone agrees on, the grit, not the courage kind, literal grit. Ancient Egyptian bread, a dietary staple, was made from stone ground flour. And stone ground wasn't just a rustic marketing term. It was a recipe for dental disaster. Microscopic bits of quartz, sand, and husk often got into the dough. So even a relatively soft meal could wear down enamel faster than you can say, Pharaoh. Imagine biting into a warm, flat loaf and grinding a layer of fine desert dust between your teeth. Not once, not twice, but every day, every meal, for decades. That's the real reason so many mummies are missing molars, or have jaws that look like gravel paths. The healer you're looking for is named Panifer. He's not technically a priest, but he's been allowed to set up a small chamber along the outer corridor of the temple to Isis. People say he's favored, which usually means he hasn't accidentally killed anyone important. Yet, you find him seated cross-legged on a reed mat, sorting through a box of crude tools. Hooks, scrapers, tweezers. All copper or bronze, some blackened with age. He wears a clean white robe and a head wrap that's been pulled slightly askew, like he got into a wrestling match with a particularly spirited goat. He looks up as you enter and smiles. You do not smile back. It hurts too much. Panifer gestures for you to sit. He says something about heat imbalance in the mouth, then lights a small cone of incense and waves it in slow circles over your face. The smoke is thick, sharp, and immediately makes your eyes water. It smells like cinnamon and something uncomfortably close to camel dung. He chants. He mutters. He asks you to open wide. You do. Now he frowns. He pokes gently at your jawline, then more firmly, and finally jabs something that makes you jolt sideways like a startled cat. Ah, he says, satisfied, the demon is strong in this one. Which, great, just what you wanted to hear. You weren't expecting a clean bill of health, but being described as possessed feels a little dramatic. Still, you let him go on, because, as fringe as it seems, there's often method to the madness. Many treatments were rituals paired with herbal compounds that actually worked. Clove oil, myrrh, and even natron had antiseptic properties. And honey, which Panifer now dabs into a little copper dish, was one of the earliest antibacterials known to humanity. The ingredients weren't the issue. The application, however, was he dips a small reed into the mixture and gently applies it to your gum. It stings like betrayal. Your fingers grip the edge of the mat. Panifer hums a little tune and reaches for something wrapped in linen. It's a chisel. Nope. You shake your head vigorously. He chuckles. Not yet, he says, placing to the side. That's reassuring in the same way a crocodile smiling is reassuring. It's nice, but you don't let your guard down. He instead picks up a small, curved scraper and begins cleaning what he calls a canal of salt. This is not a canal. It is your face. There's a grinding sound. You try not to pass out. Now, here's the funny part. Most of these dental procedures weren't meant to solve the problem. They were meant to delay it, to soothe the symptoms. A little honey here, a little incense smoke there. It was pain management in the most literal, limited sense. And yet, Egyptians treated the mouth with reverence. In mummification, the ritual of opening the mouth was sacred, performed to allow the soul to breathe and speak in the afterlife. Even in death, the mouth had power, which makes their fear of dentistry all the more ironic. The mouth was divine, but the pain that came with it, that was cursed. One lesser-known tidbit. Some tombs included tiny dental kits, scrapers, tweezers, and herbal pouches offered to help the deceased deal with their dental pain in the afterlife. Because apparently, toothaches were seen as so persistent, they might follow you into eternity. You flinch as Panifer finishes the scraping. He applies more honey, mumbles a protective spell, and finally hands you a small clay amulet. It's shaped like a lion's tooth. He tells you to wear it around your neck. It frightens the pain, he says. You're not sure it works, but you nod because the appointment is over and you're still alive. You leave the temple with a dull ache, a sticky molar, and a mild sense of achievement. Maybe the pain will fade. Maybe it won't. But you survived an ancient Egyptian dental visit. That puts you among the bravest people in history. And as you walk back to the sand-swept alleys of Thebes, past oil lamps and yawning cats, you feel the weight of centuries pressing against your smile. You are part of a very, very old club, the ancient ones with toothaches. You wake the next morning with your cheek stuck slightly to the woven reed mat. A thin trail of dried honey has crusted at the corner of your mouth, and for a brief moment, you think maybe, just maybe, the pain has gone, but then you stretch your jaw. There it is, a deep, familiar throb, like a funeral drum playing very slowly and very insistently somewhere behind your eye. Still, you rise, because in ancient Egypt, tooth pain doesn't mean you get a day off. Not when you have to haul pottery, herd goats, or, if you're slightly more prestigious, supervise grain storage and nod thoughtfully at scrolls you mostly pretend to understand. You rinse your mouth with river water, scooped in a painted cup. It's gritty naturally. The Nile always delivers. Your tongue brushes the sore spot, and you wince. Maybe you should have asked Panifer for a second amulet, or a third opinion. But what would that even look like in 1250 BCE? Probably another reed mat, another copper scraper, and maybe more incense. So instead, you do what many others did. You improvise. Egyptians were no strangers to home remedies. In fact, the average household kept a surprisingly thorough selection of treatments tucked into clay jars, reed baskets, and the occasional old sandal. You pick through a bundle of them now. Tiny packages of powdered myrrh, dried mint leaves, salt, powdered ox hooves, don't ask, and a curious little paste made from crushed onions and beer. It smells like something you'd pour on a hex, not into your face. But desperate times. You mash a little of the onion mixture onto a strip of linen and press it against your jaw. The coolness is instant. The smell, however, is interpersonal. You will not be invited to any banquets today. Historians still debate whether these folk remedies were passed down as empirical wisdom or were just communal acts of hopeful guesswork. Either way, they were used, reused, and tweaked over generations, and they weren't entirely without merit. Take garlic, for instance. Crushed garlic was known to Egyptians and used liberally for its antiseptic qualities. In fact, garlic was so valuable, it was given as wages to pyramid workers. So if you had a sore tooth and a clove of garlic, you weren't just chewing medicine, you were chewing currency. Just don't get mugged for your mouthwash. You glance down at your neighbors, one squatting beside a cart, the other hauling bricks barefoot across a courtyard, both grimacing in the same way you are. Turns out you're not special. The whole civilization is in one collective dental crisis. Why? Let's talk sand again. You remember that stone-ground bread? Well, that wasn't the only culprit. Daily Egyptian meals were full of unintentional abrasives. The grinding of flour and herbs was often done with porous stones that chipped over time, leaching flakes directly into the food. Add that to an already fibrous diet. Think date cakes, lentils, fig seeds, and you've got a tooth's worst nightmare. Not to mention the occasional bone shard in meat, or just chewing on reeds for fun. It's no wonder ancient teeth show extreme wear, exposing the pulp. In some mummies, there's clear evidence of infection. Abscesses so advanced they bore holes into the jawbone. And these weren't rare. They were typical, every day. And yet, Egyptians smiled in their art. Go look at a wall carving. Every other person is grinning mid-offering, mid-dance, mid-goose plucking. Historians wonder, were those smiles symbolic, aspirational, or did people just keep smiling because, well, what else was there to do? Fringe detail time. There's a minor deity named Heka who governed magic and medicine. Some amulets associated with him were shaped like molars or contained tiny hieroglyphs for biting strength. There's even a charm you could wear that was shaped like a hippo's tooth, because hippos apparently had enviable dental fortitude. Back in your house, the linen compress has warmed to your body heat. You peel it off and sniff it, instantly regretting both actions. Still, the pain has dulled slightly. Maybe from the garlic, maybe from the hope. You step outside again, jaw clenched, determined to carry on with your duties. You gather a woven tray, filled with dried figs, and prepare to walk the short distance to the granary. But as you walk, you pass someone unusual, a scribe, leaning against a palm post, chewing what appears to be a root. You stop. He notices. He smiles, only slightly swollen on one side, and offers a nod. Licorice, he says, tapping his cheek. It numbs the sting. You take a mental note. Tomorrow, maybe you'll ask where he gets it, or trade him some of that beer onion paste. Although something tells you it's not exactly high-demand merchandise. You finish your errands. Return home. The sun dips low, orange and gold bleeding into the dusty skyline. The cool air soothes your skin, but your mouth still hums with quiet complaint. So you sit in the courtyard. You chew a sprig of mint. You imagine the relief sinking in through your molars, spreading through your gums like a prayer. You listen to the sounds of other homes settling for the night. Fire crackles. Pots clink. Somewhere, a baby laughs in its sleep. And in that stillness, you realize something. Even thousands of years ago, people ended their days in the same way. Worn, weary, full of complaints, but doing their best to soften the edges. You close your eyes, lean back against the sun-warmed brick, and let the ache settle into something you can bear. After all, pain is temporary. Dignity is eternal. The next morning greets you not with a songbird or a friendly rooster, but with the soft shuffle of sandals and the low mutter of gossip from the women gathering at the well. Water must be fetched early, before the sun turns your neighborhood into a brick oven. You stretch, carefully, because the tooth still complains, and wander out with your jug tucked under your arm, trying not to jostle it too much. Any sudden movement seems to echo in your jaw. As you wait your turn, someone mentions a name that makes a few ears perk up. Not a priest, not a pharaoh, a dentist, or more precisely, the mouth doctor. Now, let's be clear. The concept of professional dentist in ancient Egypt was blurry. There were certainly practitioners with medical training, some scribes, some priests, who focus on teeth and gums. In fact, one man in particular keeps popping up in records. He's Yare, the original dental influencer. His tomb inscription proudly lists him as chief of dentists and physicians, which might sound like a glamorous title, but in reality probably meant he dealt with a lot of pus and people would try to treat molar pain with prayer and regret. But even his fame didn't stop Egyptians from fearing the actual treatment process. Why? Because it was terrifying. You shuffle forward in the well line, listening more closely. Apparently, someone's uncle, probably exaggerating, went to the temple for a gum lancing and came back mute for 3 days. The priest had scraped too deep or chanted the wrong spell, or maybe just had a heavy hand. The story shifts with each telling. What stays consistent is the fear. You fill your jug, quietly wondering, if my tooth gets worse, do I go? Do I trust someone with a copper hook and incense burner to dig around in my skull? Because yes, tools existed. Archaeologists have found them. Primitive metal probes, spatulas, scrapers. Some look suspiciously like tweezers. Others like implements better suited for cheese making. Many of them double for use on the living and the dead, which doesn't exactly instill confidence. Historians still argue whether these tools were intended primarily for the living or for preparing mummies. See, dental damage was often repaired during mummification. Holes were packed, teeth glued in place with resin and linen. It made the deceased look whole again, but it also blurs the line. Were they trying to treat the problem or just make the body look good in the afterlife? You carry your water home, trying not to imagine your molar being packed like a pharaoh's travel kit. Back in your courtyard, your grandmother is hunched over a small grinding stone, mixing something into a paste. It smells faintly of mint, clay, and something chalky. You know this smell. Toothpaste. Well, the ancient Egyptian version. Anyway, let's talk about that for a moment, because it's weirdly impressive. Long before Colgate and whitening strips, these folks were making DIY oral hygiene concoctions that actually sort of worked. A typical recipe? Ground rock salt, mint, dried iris flower, and pepper. Yes, pepper. Because who doesn't want their morning mouthwash to double as a fire hazard? You ask if you can try some, and your grandmother obliges. She hands you a sliver of frayed linen. No brushes yet. And you dip it into the grayish paste. You dab it onto your teeth, and immediately regret it. The salt grinds like sandpaper. The pepper burns. But the mint is fresh. Cooling. You can't help but wonder if this is what that scribe from yesterday meant when he spoke of licorice numbing the pain. Still, you gag a little and spit into the dirt. Your grandmother nods solemnly. Good, yes? She says without irony. You smile, barely. Cleansing. You reply, carefully neutral. And the thing is, this wasn't just vanity. Clean teeth were important. Bad breath, in particular, was considered a spiritual weakness. Some texts describe mouth demons that crept in during sleep or sickness. A foul-smelling mouth could be a sign of possession or a failing of the soul. So oral hygiene was more than physical. It was moral, even divine. That's why priests had their own hygiene rituals. Before entering the temple, they were expected to purify their bodies, including their mouths. This involved rinsing with natron, a naturally occurring salt used in mummification, and chewing on herbs like frankincense and myrrh. Yes, the same stuff gifted to baby deities, also used as proto-breath fresheners. Fringe detail incoming. A cache of scrolls found near Luxor includes a mouth purifying hymn, meant to be chanted while chewing specific leaves. The idea was that your words would infuse the herbs with spiritual potency, creating a kind of holy chewing gum. Delicious. You take note of that. Maybe tomorrow you'll chew and chant. What could it hurt? By mid-afternoon, your tooth has settled into a dull ache again. You take it as a win. Your chores are done. Your mouth is less cursed. You sit in the shade of a fig tree and watch as a procession winds down the street. A funeral, it looks like. Silent, orderly. The mourners dressed in white linen. And for a moment, you remember the resin-packed jaws of the dead. How, even in death, appearance mattered. Teeth mattered. Because a broken smile could follow you to the afterlife, where, according to one myth, you might be judged not only by your heart, but by how well you maintained your molars. You close your eyes and picture the field of reeds. Eternal peace. Eternal harvest. Eternal sunlight. And yes, eternal chewing, probably best to be prepared. You suck on a mint leaf and press the heel of your hand against your jaw. The pain flares once, then quiets again. And you think, tomorrow, maybe I'll visit the scribe again. Ask about licorice. Maybe learn the chewing hymn. Or maybe I'll just stick with Grandma's toothpaste and hope the demons don't mind salt. You wake the next morning to the scrape of a clay bowl across stone. Your grandmother grinding more of her minty, peppery, questionably cleansing paste. The aroma seeps into morning air, sharp and earthy, like something between a garden breeze and a sneeze. You sit up slowly, half hoping the toothache has magically vanished. It has not. If anything, it's sulking now. Less fire, more pressure. Like a tiny, sulky god demanding tribute from your gums. You glance at the little linen strip your grandmother offers and sigh. Another dose of dental courage. But today, you're not the only one navigating this pain. Because in a household a few doors down, a very different approach is being taken. You hear it before you see it. The unmistakable tunk-tunk of a priest's staff hitting the ground, followed by the wet mumble of a spell in progress. You peek through the reed gate. A boy, no older than 12, is reclined on a woven mat, while a temple scribe-turned-healer circles him like a bird of prey. He holds not a tool, but a roll of papyrus and a bowl of herbs, puffing smoke onto the child's face in rhythm with the incantation. This is the alternative. Spiritual dentistry. While many Egyptians did attempt rudimentary procedures, especially in later periods, the bulk of dental care, if you can call it that, was spiritual. Teeth were understood as vulnerable to curses, divine displeasure, or even the mischief of ghosts. There's a recorded spell in the Eber's Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the world, that reads something like, "Recite this charm, O the aching tooth. Be far from me, ooze, ooze, ooze." The practitioner would then pack the mouth with honey and ground seeds, hoping both the words and the goo would do the trick. Historians still debate whether these rituals were ever accompanied by actual treatment, or if the belief itself was the medicine. But clearly, when you're in enough pain, smoke and poetry start to look pretty appealing. You consider the scene for a moment longer, then rub your jaw and walk on. Today, you've decided to visit someone even stranger than the mouth priest, the embalmer's apprentice. Now don't panic. You're not headed to the afterlife just yet, but word around the neighborhood is that the apprentice, young, awkward, and constantly smelling of resin, has been experimenting with glue and teeth. You find him near the temple storehouse, squatting beside a crate of jars and chewing distractedly on a reed stalk. He looks up with a mix of suspicion and excitement, like a cat that just found a new toy. You explain your problem. He squints. "Is it loose?" You shake your head. "Just hurts. Right here." You point. He thinks for a long time, then says something you absolutely didn't expect. "I have be glue." You blink. "Be glue?" He nods proudly. "Propolis. Bees make it. Sticky. Smells nice. Good for keeping things in place." Apparently, embalmers sometimes use propolis, a resin-like substance bees use to seal their hives, to patch teeth on mummies. In a few rare cases, they even experimented with dental bridges. Gold wires threaded between teeth to close gaps or secure loose ones. It's one of the earliest examples of prosthetic dentistry. High-tech, in a very sticky way. You ask if it would help your pain. He shrugs. "Won't hurt." "Probably." So, naturally, you agree to try. He smears a tiny dab of the amber-colored goop onto a sliver of linen, then gently presses it against your back molar. The smell is sweet, herbal. The sensation, odd. Like a polite bee has decided to sit in your mouth and take a nap. You leave with your mouth faintly buzzing, unsure if anything has changed but appreciating, at least, the novelty. By the time the sun is overhead, you return home, where your grandmother greets you with one raised eyebrow. You look like you've been kissed by a bee. You grin, carefully. The afternoon is warm, so you lie in the courtyard shade, chewing on licorice root. It doesn't cure anything, but it does keep your jaw occupied. And for a society with no floss, chewing was actually considered part of the hygiene routine. Archaeologists have found bundles of twigs, often from aromatic trees like myrrh or cinnamon, stored near ancient toilets, suggesting multi-purpose cleaning uses. But in the case of licorice, it's more than habit. It has mild analgesic and antibacterial properties. The Egyptians didn't know those words, but they knew the comfort. You close your eyes, sucking slowly on the root, and begin to hum softly. Not quite a hymn, more like a tune your mother used to sing. You try to remember the mouth-purifying chant the scribe mentioned. It went something like, "O breath of Ra, cleanse my tongue. O men of Nile, make sweet my song." You forget the rest. Still, the act of reciting it feels soothing. Maybe that's the point. Ritual as relief, words as medicine. In some circles, amulets were worn specifically to ward off dental pain. Small charms shaped like the god Bes, a squat, lion-faced figure who protected children and chased away illness, were strung on linen cords and kissed before bed. You remember seeing one dangling from a neighbor's doorpost. You thought it was just decoration. And if things got truly dire, there were still the gods. Tauret, the hippo goddess of childbirth and healing, was often invoked in household rites. Her presence alone was thought to protect against physical suffering. Sometimes, in moments of real pain, you whisper her name, just in case she's listening. As evening descends and the heat lifts, your jaw still aches. But less, maybe it's the licorice, or the glue, or just a good old-fashioned placebo effect delivered via song and shadow. Whatever the reason, you feel a little steadier now. You light a small oil lamp and tuck yourself into bed. And just before sleep takes you, you touch your cheek and whisper, "Be far from me, ooze." Hey, you never know. You wake again. Not with a jolt, but that slow, familiar drift up through dreams that smells like warm bread and clay dust. Your tongue flicks to your tooth instinctively. Still tender, but not throbbing. You decide this is progress. Outside, the sky is already pale, blushing with the promise of heat, and the street is alive with pre-market bustle. The scent of date cakes wafts over mud brick rooftops. Somewhere, a goat argues loudly with a basket. You slip on your sandals and step out, hoping to catch the healer priest again. Not for another incantation, though you wouldn't say no, but for something he mentioned yesterday, almost offhandedly, a powder made from crushed ostrich eggshells, supposed to cool the mouth, which sounds promising, or at least refreshingly weird. You find him sitting cross-legged beneath an awning, arranging bundles of dried herbs like they're playing pieces in a game only he understands. You greet him, gesture to your jaw, and mention the ostrich thing. He blinks at you, tilts his head, and goes, "You want the smile of an ibis?" You pause. This is not what you expected, but you nod anyway. He chuckles and hands you a folded cloth packet filled with pale powder. Grind gently with a reed. Swish. Spit. Smile. The process is chalky and awkward, and the taste is halfway between limestone and disappointment, but there's a faint coolness as promised. Your mouth feels like it's been lightly exfoliated by a desert breeze. This is your life now, and you're not alone. In fact, the more you look, the more you see signs that dental rituals were part of daily existence for everyone in your community. There's a man with a peppermint stuffed pouch tied to his belt, the woman fanning herself while chewing clove pods. Even children rub their gums with tiny bits of salt and dried mint. Some of it works. Some of it just looks impressive. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more about health or social expectation. After all, a sweet breath was as much a status symbol as a clean tunic. Just like today's mouthwash commercials. Really, only with more crocodile dung. Speaking of which, you pass by a stall selling toiletries, yes? Even 5,000 years ago, and spot tiny pots of something greenish and grainy. The vendor, an older woman with a mouthful of gold inlays and no patience, points to the label, herbal tooth powder, mixed with natron. Smells like basil, works like a curse. She's not wrong. You buy a little out of curiosity, and the scent hits like a blessing, mint, myrrh, and something else. Something vaguely medicinal and deeply unpleasant. Turns out, many early tooth-cleaning pastes in Egypt used natron, a naturally occurring salt used not only for mummification, but also cleaning, preserving food, and yes, scrubbing your molars into submission. Its abrasive properties help wear off plaque and maybe a little enamel, too. Minor detail. Back home, your grandmother insists you try brushing the old way. Chew the end of a palm twig until it frays. Dip it in powder, and go to town on your teeth like you're scrubbing a temple floor. It's not elegant, but there's a rhythm to it, a tempo that calms the mind. You find yourself humming again, this time something different. One of the temple procession songs, slow and heavy, as if brushing is not just maintenance, but invocation, a plea to the gods of bone and breath. And the gods are always listening, apparently. Because later that afternoon, a scribe's assistant stops by her home to drop off a scroll. Not for you, but for your uncle, who's due to copy legal texts all week. You catch a glimpse of the assistant's mouth as he yawns, a mess of gaps in gold. You ask casually if the temple scribes know anything about tooth repair. He smirks and says, "We know it hurts." That's enough. But then he adds something more interesting. The high priest at Karnak have been experimenting with herbal compresses and pressure points. One of them claims to have relieved a molar ache with a single pinch to the ear, which, honestly, sounds like something your cousin would invent to avoid chewing dry barley cakes. Still, you store it away, because knowledge in your world doesn't come in books. It comes in offhand comments, overheard complaints, and gossip from fishmongers. And slowly, a picture is forming. Egyptians didn't have dentists, not really, but they had a patchwork of solutions, rituals, experiments, and options, each imperfect, each sincere. You sit at the end of the day with a bit of papyrus and charcoal, sketching a diagram of a tooth the way you imagine it looks beneath the gum. Root, crown, pain center. You add a B, you label it guardian. The drawing's terrible, but it helps, because understanding is its own relief. And when the sun dips behind the western hills and the sky turns the color of old myrrh, you prepare for bed the way your ancestors did. Mouth rinsed, lips pressed briefly to an amulet. Prayers murmur half into the air, half into your pillow. And as you lie down, you realize something quietly miraculous. The ache is fading, or maybe just becoming something smaller, tolerable, like all the other little pains we carry with us. The priest, the grandmother, the embalmer's glue, all trying to fix something in their own strange ways. And somehow, through all the awkward powders and ancient spells and oddly relaxing chewing sticks, they kind of did. Tomorrow, you'll wake again to bread, heat, and mint-scented morning breath. But tonight, you sleep with peace on your tongue. Your sleep is slow and syrupy, like honey poured over stone. You wake in the blue-gray sliver of dawn, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's been gently dusted in ash. Still quiet, still warm, still sore, but in that satisfying, worked-out kind of way, like your mouth survived something epic, and your gums are now quietly narrating it to your molars. You stretch, you spit, a little salt, a little red. You nod like, yes, progress. And then you remember something. You heard a rumor, yesterday or the day before. It's hard to say anymore, about a tomb recently opened near Saqqara. Not a royal one, not full of gold, but belonging to a well-regarded physician, one of the mouth men, as they were sometimes called in half-whispered reverence. And inside, they found something peculiar, an organized shelf of tools. Not surgical knives or embalming hooks. No, these were smaller, rounded, polished, some carved from ivory, others of copper, and all labeled, sort of, with curious symbols that seemed less medical and more poetic. One tool was marked with a reed and a moon. Another had a symbol of a honeybee beside what looked like a crack in stone. Scholars are still arguing about what it means. Were these metaphors? Recipes? A secret language for oral hygiene? You decide naturally that you need to see it for yourself. So you borrow a donkey from your cousin, who demands 2 loaves of fig bread as collateral, because trust is fragile, and you set off towards a car with a water pouch and one very enthusiastic sense of historical curiosity. The ride is dusty, the sun is slow, and the donkey is deeply resentful of your company. But you make it, eventually. The tomb is already becoming a kind of tourist trap, but you slip past the guards by pretending to be a visiting stoneworker. Your hands are dusty enough, your sandals crack just so. You nod a lot, mumble about lentils. Nobody questions you. Inside, the air is cool and damp, and weirdly minty. That's when you see them, the tools, lined up on a shallow shelf carved directly into the stone, nestled in shallow grooves, as if placed there only moments ago. There's a curved hook with a tiny mirror fused to one side, a flattened pick shaped like a lotus petal, and a wide, blunt blade etched with sunburst, maybe for cleaning, maybe for cursing. Who can say? But here's the fascinating part. There are tiny bowls beside each one, some still holding remnants of dried herbs, powders, and oils. One smells distinctly like eucalyptus, another like fermented honey. One emits a scent so bitter and earthy that your eyes water. Scholars still argue whether these tools were ceremonial or practical. Were they used on the living or the dead? Or perhaps both? After all, Egyptians believed the afterlife required upkeep. And what good is eternal bliss with a throbbing bicuspid? A fringe theory even suggests that some priests acted as afterlife dentists, cleansing the teeth of the departed during embalming to ensure they could speak their name properly in the Hall of Judgment. No name, no passage. And what blocks speech more effectively than a bad toothache? You leave the tomb awash in speculation, a little awe, and a distinct sense that ancient oral care was far more philosophical than we give it credit for. Back in town, you start noticing echoes of what you saw. A potter's apprentice scrapes glaze off a bowl with a tool eerily similar to the lotus petal pick. A baker smooths sesame paste with something almost identical to the sunburst blade. Everyday items, mimicking the sacred. It's like tooth care was never just a private ritual. It was embedded in the rhythm of life itself. And perhaps the rhythm of story. Later that week, you're invited to a small gathering, half feast, half storytelling circle, and someone brings out a scroll to share a poem about the god's teeth. Yes, teeth. Apparently, R.A. once broke a molar laughing too hard at a goose joke, and Thoth crafted him a golden replacement with inscriptions for wisdom and clarity. R.A. then bit a pyramid in half just to test it. The room howls with laughter. But you can't help wondering, is it all myth? Or did this story begin as a way to explain some noble's bizarre gold dental implant? You've seen it before. Little slivers of gold pressed into broken teeth, a luxury few could afford, but many envied. Decorative, perhaps, but some speculate they offered pain relief by keeping sensitive areas covered. Or maybe they were status symbols, like flashing a gold tooth at a banquet instead of a gold ring. And there it is again, that line between healing and performance, between medicine and magic, between brushing for health and brushing for gossip. At home that night, you prepare your own concoction. You mix crushed fennel, natron, and just a hint of honey water. The result is gritty, pungent, and vaguely therapeutic. You dab it on a frayed stick and clean each tooth slowly, thoughtfully, like you're sketching, or writing, or remembering. Each stroke a whisper, each spit a prayer. And when you rinse your mouth with cool water, your reflection catches in a polished shard of copper nearby. Your teeth, still imperfect, but cared for, valued. You sleep that night with the taste of fennel on your tongue, the image of ancient tools in your mind, and the soft certainty that somewhere, maybe in the stars, maybe in a scroll, someone's keeping a record of every tiny ritual you've rediscovered. By now, you've developed what can only be described as a nightly ritual. Not just a cleansing of teeth, though that still happens, now with kind of reverence, but a mental winding down. 2. You sit on your rooftop with a cup of warm barley milk, watching the lamps flicker along the canals below, and you think about gums, soft tissue, the borderland between what's outside and what's trying very hard to stay in. You begin to suspect the Sumerians had thoughts like this too. Maybe not during every brush, but surely once in a while, when the stars were quiet and the night didn't smell too much like fish. Your mind drifts to an artifact you overheard scholars whispering about last market day, a stone tablet from Lagash, covered in cuneiform, buried deep in an archive for decades. Only recently translated, and the contents? A dentist log. Yes, an actual account from a Sumerian ASU specializing in oral complaints. The translation is choppy, but the meaning is clear. On the third moon, Kuana came, gums swollen like weed in flood, gave rinse of brine and hyssop. She sang after. And later, Zimri fell from ox cart, cracked front tooth, smiled less, applied paste of myrrh and reed ash. He returned 3 moons later, smiled again. Historians still argue whether these logs are strictly factual or partly ceremonial. Were they written as scientific notes, healing records, or perhaps as receipts of sorts, an early form of medical charting for the temple to track payments in barley or cloth? Either way, the care is evident. There's no rush, no brutality, just a quiet dedication to the maintenance of something small but deeply personal. You wonder how they trained. There were no dental schools. Of course, most likely, skills were passed down through families or learned by apprentices who sat at the feet of healers and copied their techniques with great care. Maybe they practiced on cattle teeth first. Maybe they learned by accident, one brave cousin volunteering to chew a hot root first. There's one tale, half recorded, half whispered, about a woman named Inanisha, who was said to be the tooth reader of UR. People travel for miles to have her examine their mouths, not just for health, but for fortune. She believed that the alignment of teeth could reveal personality, that a gap meant a generous spirit, that overlapping molars predicted conflict, that a chipped incisor foretold a great journey. Skeptical? Of course, but you have to admire the flair. And there's something strangely modern about it, too. How many palm readers today slip in a little dental judgment between lifelines and love prospects? You grind your teeth, they might say, you hold stress in your jaw, you should rest. Sound advice, honestly. Speaking of rest, tonight your own gums feel a bit sore, maybe from all that fennel root. So you try something softer, a paste of milk thistle and mash figure, surprisingly soothing and vaguely delicious. You begin to suspect that half the appeal of ancient toothpaste was its snack potential. While you swirl the mixture between your teeth, you remember another tidbit, an ancient charm carved into a clay amulet worn around the neck of a young boy buried near Kish. The inscription? To keep the ache away, sing the name of the river god and chew sweet reeds. Chew sweet reeds, a home remedy, a religious practice, a lullaby. Some archaeologists think this points to a blend of medicine and magic, that toothaches were believed to be the work of tiny demons, lurking the gums, dislodged only by certain plants and incantations. Others think it's just what worked. Reeds are fibrous, sweet, and mildly antibacterial. Singing calms the nerves. And belief, well, belief can do a lot of heavy lifting. You catch yourself humming later that night, chewing idly on a licorice root, not because you hurt, but because it feels good to participate, to echo something that once comforted someone 1,000 years ago. You imagine Inanisha leaning over a patient in a dark mud brick room, the oil lamp flickering, her fingers smelling of clove and soot. She hums. The patient hums back. And slowly the ache eases. There's power in this kind of intimacy. In one person tending to another's pain, not violently, not clinically, but with warmth, with attention, with a tiny, well-shaped tool and a whispered blessing. You wonder what future generations will think of your own rituals, your rows of colorful brushes, the click of your electric flosser, the odd pride you take in a minty aftertaste. Will they laugh or envy the simplicity? Because for all their crude ingredients, the Sumerians had something we've nearly lost. Time. Time to sit. Time to chew. Time to hum. You sit now, brushing slowly with a bristle of dried papyrus dipped in fig mash. You hum softly. The stars are quieter than usual tonight. Even the city's distant noise feels like a lullaby. And as your teeth rest clean in your mouth, your mind settles in too, into the warm, worn pathways of the past. A rhythm of healing that needs no modern names. Just hands. herbs, and a little faith. The next morning, or what passes for morning in this soft, dusk-dawn half-sleep, you find yourself tracing the rim of an old clay bowl. It's a tooth-cleaning basin, or at least that's what you've decided it is. Found at a site near Nippur, unassuming in form, etched faintly with a symbol that could mean mouth or possibly flower. Scholarly consensus? Absolutely not. In fact, historians still argue whether it was for spitting, storing, or serving lentils. But to you, it feels just right for rinsing. You swirl a little lukewarm water in a bowl, and imagine being one of the many Sumerians who gather near riverbanks each day to perform their rituals. Brushing, rinsing, and yes, maybe spitting discreetly into a personal bowl instead of fouling sacred water. This idea of cleanliness is sacred threads through their lives. Temples weren't just centers of worship, but also of hygiene. Not fancy by our standards, no gleaming tiles or lemon-scented soap, but they had drainage systems, and in some elite homes, even rudimentary clay piping. Imagine how radical that must have felt. No outhouses, no chamber pots, just a pipe leading away from you and into oblivion. Magic, and in that world, oral hygiene wasn't isolated. It was tied up with ritual purification. If you were going to speak to the gods, offer prayers, chants, or blessings, your mouth had to be clean. You couldn't invoke the divine while flecked with yesterday's lentils. So brushing before bed? That was just part of preparing the soul, not just the gums. Some temples even enforced mouth-cleaning fasts before festivals. Abstain from meat, speak no lies, and brush with temple-sanctioned reed sticks soaked in tamarind sap. One odd tablet from Eridu references a priestess named Ennansha, who was once barred from a festival for forgetting to cleanse her teeth. The official record simply says, her breath, unsuitable for prayer. Harsh? Maybe, but you admire the commitment. You start to wonder what kind of flavors they like best. Tamarind? Probably. Licorice root? Definitely. One fragment from a home in Lagash includes the recipe, mashed date pit with lime ash. Mix with honey until smooth. Apply with fishbone or soft stick. Now you pause. Fishbone, that's a new one. Tiny, curved, and probably brittle. But if used carefully, maybe it worked like a disposable dental pick. Or a cautionary tale waiting to happen. You can just hear a nervous parent saying, "Don't chew the fishbone. It's for teeth, not snacks." Of course, not everyone could afford these ingredients. For the poor, tooth care was likely more aspirational. River rinses, bark scrapings, maybe just a nightly prayer that the tooth demons would go bother someone wealthier. And yes, about those demons. Remember the little incantation tablets? One of the more famous ones features a creature named a shag. Not quite a devil, more like a persistent nuisance spirit blamed for toothaches. The cure? A chant and a poultice of mustard seed and salt. You mutter it under your breath now, not because your teeth hurt, but because it sounds nice in the silence. The chant is simple, a rhythmic hum. Something about spitting into the wind and showing your molars to the stars. There's a kind of dignity in that. Taking your pain and addressing it like an old rival. Not fleeing it, not masking it. Just saying, "I see you ache. Let's talk." Tonight, your own ache is more imagined than real. But you honor it anyway. A little paste of ginger and date flesh goes on your gums. It tingles. Your tongue pokes at the molars just to check. Still there. Still sound. Still yours. And you begin to think about how community formed around these routines. A family gathering in the courtyard at night, each with their brush, their bowl, their bit of balm. Stories traded as mouths were cleaned. Maybe a grandmother demonstrating the ideal angle. A child giggling, spitting too soon. A father reminding everyone that Temple Day was tomorrow, so no raw garlic. It wasn't just dental care. It was bonding. Even the language reflected this. One Sumerian phrase loosely translates to "he speaks with fresh breath," used both literally and metaphorically to mean he speaks wisely or he speaks kindly. In other words, oral hygiene and moral character were linked. To smell sweet was to speak true. To tend your mouth was to tend your soul. Now that's pressure, but it also explains the reverence. Why people kept their toothbrushes. Well, tooth sticks wrapped in cloth, or stored in pottery tubes etched with family symbols. These weren't disposable objects. They were personal, almost talismanic. One grave uncovered near Umma included such a tube. Inside, a single bristle stick, wrapped in what was once linen, now dust. Next to it, a tiny amulet of a lion's head. Protection, maybe, or simply pride. You lean back and wonder how many bedtime routines have gone unrecorded. How many tiny gestures of self-care vanished into clay and soil. But not entirely. Not tonight. Because here you are, thousands of years later, brushing not just in mimicry but in memory. You reach for a bit of warm water in your own vessel. This one's ceramic, maybe IKEA, but close enough. You swish, you spit, and you smile just a little, because suddenly the act doesn't feel small. It feels sacred. A ritual of endings. A soft, clean close to the day. Now that your teeth feel just a bit less dusty, you wander deeper into the world of Sumerian nighttime rituals. You might think, surely, tooth care was just a quick chore, maybe a dab of mini sap and done. But no. For these ancient folks, it was a slow, deliberate ceremony, almost like the quiet finale of the day. Picture yourself in a dim courtyard, the smell of drying reeds and baked mud filling the air, while the last light of sunset slips behind low hills. The family gathers. Not just any family, but one led by a father who's part priest, part storyteller, part tooth care coach. His voice is low and steady as he passes down the technique. How to hold the twig at the right angle, how to scrape just enough without hurting the gums, how to use the spittle to soften the herbal paste. This isn't just personal hygiene. It's a rite of passage, a daily lesson in patience and precision. You can almost hear a younger sibling, cheeks puffed with laughter, trying to mimic the adult motions, but fumbling, sending a little cloud of powder into the evening air. Historians still argue whether these rituals were primarily about physical health or served a deeper symbolic purpose. Perhaps a way to mark the transition from the chaos of daylight to the calm of night, a form of mental preparation to face dreams and spirits. After all, Sumerian society was steeped in mysticism, where even the smallest act could hold cosmic meaning. Consider this. The ingredients of their toothpaste were more than practical. Ash, salt, and sulfur were common, substances believed to ward off evil spirits as much as decay. One ancient text even suggests that chewing on certain roots was thought to protect the wearer from nightmares, tying oral care to spiritual defense. And what about those herbal mixtures? Tamarind pulp, known for its tangy bite, combined with a pinch of burnt date palm. Ingredients that might sound like an odd cocktail, but made perfect sense to the ancients. Each plant had a story, a spirit, a purpose. The pungent smell of mustard seed wasn't just a flavor, but a warning signal to evil lurking near your sleeping head. This layered approach to dental hygiene, part medicine, part magic, is a recurring theme. Even in everyday conversation, people refer to their mouth as a temple, reinforcing the idea that cleanliness was intertwined with holiness. To be unclean was not only socially embarrassing, but spiritually dangerous. There's a fringe theory that some of these rituals evolved directly into the later, more elaborate purification ceremonies performed by Babylonian priests. Fancy incantations and symbolic washings that echoed the Sumerians' focus on mouth and breath. Though it's hard to prove, you like to think that each brush and rinse was a tiny echo down the centuries. What about tools? The common tooth stick was typically fashioned from twigs of aromatic trees, like neem or date palm, which had natural antibacterial properties. And yes, as you remember, sometimes fish bones or small animal bones were used as picks, despite the obvious risks. Archaeologists have even found early toothbrushes made from bundles of bristles tied to sticks, rudimentary but effective. You can imagine the sensation, bristles scraping your teeth, sharper than modern nylon, but somehow satisfying. By now, you might be wondering, did the Sumerians have any concept of cavities? Well, sort of. Dental caries were less common due to their low-sugar diet, but tooth wear and abscesses were widespread. There are medical tablets prescribing remedies like poultices made of wine and herbs, or even tooth surgeries performed with crude drills fashioned from flint. Yikes! Definitely not for the faint of heart. The scary part? These procedures weren't always successful, and people sometimes avoided dentists Well, tooth doctors, just as much as anyone else might avoid pain. This avoidance is echoed in the mythic stories about a shag, the tooth demon, suggesting a cultural anxiety around the mouth that persists even today. Imagine a moment in a Sumerian household when a child complains of toothache. The family gathers, performing rituals and chanting incantations, hoping to pacify the spirit before calling upon the healer. The healer's arrival is both a relief and a cause for nervous anticipation. Ancient dentistry was a gamble at best. As your own teeth settle into calmness, you appreciate the blend of pragmatism and spirituality in this ritual. The Sumerians didn't just brush their teeth. They cared for their souls, their stories, and their community through these nightly acts. So tonight, when you pull out your own toothbrush, maybe give a little nod to those ancient hands, holding twigs by the river, whispering chants, and brushing with reverence. And remember, your nightly tooth care is not just about fresh breath. It's a quiet ritual, a pause, a gentle bow to the day that's past and the dreams that await. Now that your teeth are feeling freshly scrubbed and the evening air is growing cooler, let's wander back to the Sumerians' world of night rituals, focusing on the surprising role of scent and its connection to oral hygiene. You probably didn't think of toothpaste as perfume, but for the Sumerians, the smell of your mouth after brushing was almost as important as the cleaning itself. Imagine the city of Ur or Uruk after sunset. The streets quiet down, and in the homes, soft fires crackle while families gather for their final moments before sleep. The air is thick with incense, myrrh, frankincense, and other resins burned to cleanse the space and invite protection. But alongside these, the lingering aroma from your herbal toothpaste played its own part in the olfactory orchestra of the night. The ingredients used in these early pastes didn't just scrub teeth. They masked bad breath and conveyed social status. A mouth that smelled like burnt sulfur or fermented date might signal someone poor or unclean, while fresher, herbaceous breath suggested refinement and good health. People could read each other's habits by scent alone. Historians still argue whether this was mostly about hygiene or a coded social language. One curious practice was to chew aromatic resins or herbs right after brushing, sometimes wrapping the leaves in tiny bundles called mouth sachets. These bundles, sometimes infused with myrtle or cedar leaves, were designed to slowly release fragrance, like a natural breath mint, in a world without toothpaste tubes or sprays. This was a handy solution for keeping conversations pleasant. There's also a fringe tidbit about mouth charms, small amulets worn or carried that supposedly influence breath freshness and oral health. Some Sumerian households kept tiny clay or stone tokens near their washing basins, believed to ward off bad odors or evil spirits that might cause tooth decay. While the exact origin and use remain debated, it's a fascinating glimpse into how intertwined daily care was with spiritual belief. You might find it amusing that some of the herbs used for scent, like asafoetida, had a pungent odor on their own, but were prized for their cleansing properties, much like modern garlic. It's like wearing a perfume that smells awful but is supposed to keep you healthy. That's dedication. Now, if you're imagining a Sumerian standing in front of a mirror, well, mirrors were rare and mostly polished metals, but you can picture them using polished obsidian or water surfaces to check their teeth and lips. The desire for a pleasant mouth, visually and aromatically, was clear. In fact, Sumerians had specific words describing the smell of breath, often linked with purity or impurity, and this language shaped social interactions. The nighttime oral care routine was also about ritualized mindfulness, an early form of self-care. Scraping, rinsing, and scenting were done slowly, deliberately. It was a moment to transition out of the chaos of the day, calming both body and spirit. You can almost feel the soft glow of oil lamps casting shadows as families share stories, all the while maintaining that sacred mouth cleanliness. Some scholars suggest that this focus on scent and breath hygiene influenced later cultures, including the Babylonians and Assyrians, and eventually seeped into Mediterranean traditions. Perfumed mouthwashes and aromatic tooth powders appear in many ancient texts, hinting at a shared cultural appreciation for the power of scent. But there's an ironic twist. Some of these fragrant ingredients were also irritants. Frequent use could cause gum inflammation or allergic reactions. So while your Sumerian ancestors hoped for fresh breath and spiritual protection, they might have been battling minor mouth discomfort all the while. Historians still debate the true health impact of these mixtures. In the end, the scent of your mouth wasn't just a matter of hygiene. It was an expression of identity, respect, and connection to the divine. It was a fragrant handshake to the night itself. So tonight, as you freshen your breath, take a moment to breathe in the quiet complexity of that ancient ritual, where cleanliness, scent, and spirit met under the stars, preparing you not just for sleep, but for the mysteries that await there.